I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who'd sell her son's house. Even saying it out loud sounds terrible. But sometimes, life takes you down paths you never imagined walking. When Thomas called me that evening asking if I could move in with him and his family, I felt nothing but gratitude. At 72, living alone had become difficult after your father passed. The stairs in our old house were getting harder to climb, and the winters felt colder somehow. So when my son offered me a place in his home, the very home I helped him buy 15 years ago, I packed my photo albums, your father's watch, and the quilt my grandmother made, thinking I was going to a place where I'd be welcomed. I remember the day we bought that house for Thomas. He was just starting his career, newly married to Karen, and they were expecting their first child, my granddaughter Lily. Your father and I had saved all our lives, living modestly in the same 3-bedroom house where we raised our children. We never took fancy vacations or drove expensive cars. Instead, we put money aside, telling ourselves it was for something important someday. That something important turned out to be the down payment for Thomas's house, a beautiful 2-story home with a garden that reminded me of the one I had always dreamed of. We gave them 60% of the down payment, practically our entire savings. Your father shook Thomas's hand and said, "Make this a happy home, son." Thomas hugged us both, tears in his eyes, promising he would. For years it seemed he kept that promise. Lily was born, then little James 3 years later. The house filled with birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and Sunday dinners, where I'd bring my special pot roast after your father passed. The garden bloomed with the roses I helped Karen plant. It was everything we had hoped for when we wrote that check. I lived in my own home for another 10 years after your father died. I managed just fine for a while. I've always been independent, you know that. But time catches up with everyone. After my fall last winter, Thomas and Karen suggested I sell my house and move in with them. "Mom, we have that guest room downstairs," Thomas said, his hand on my shoulder at the hospital. "You won't have to worry about stairs, and you'll be with family." Karen nodded, adding, "The kids would love having Grandma around all the time." I was touched. Truly I was. Selling the home where I'd lived for 46 years wasn't easy, but the thought of being surrounded by family, of hearing Lily practicing piano and James running through the house, made it bearable. The first few weeks were wonderful. I made breakfast for the children before school, tended to the garden, and had dinner ready when everyone came home. Karen seemed relieved to have help with the household chores, and Thomas would wink at me across the table saying, "Best decision we ever made bringing Mom here." But slowly, things began to change. I first noticed it when I suggested rearranging the living room furniture to make it easier for me to navigate with my walking cane. "Mom," Thomas said, his voice different somehow, "we like the house the way it is." I nodded and smiled, not wanting to cause trouble. "Of course, dear. It was just a thought." Then came the comments about the electricity bill being higher, the water usage increasing, the grocery expenses growing. Small comments at first, said with a laugh, but I felt the weight behind them. One evening, as we sat at the dining table, the same table I had helped them choose when they first moved in, Thomas cleared his throat. "Mom, Karen and I have been talking, and we think it would be fair if you contributed to the household expenses." I looked up from my plate, confused. "Of course, dear. I've been buying groceries and helping with the cooking and cleaning." Thomas exchanged a glance with Karen. "We were thinking more along the lines of rent, Mom, and utilities." "Rent?" I repeated the word, sure I had misheard. "Just $800 a month," Karen added quickly. "That's less than half what you'd pay for an apartment, and it includes everything." I sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, looking at my son. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the teenager I'd taught to drive, the young man whose dreams I had helped make possible. "I see," was all I could say. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed. the bed in the guest room that was now apparently my rented accommodation, and looked at the framed photo of your father and me on our 40th anniversary. "What would you do, Robert?" I whispered to his smiling face. The next morning, I wrote a check for $800 and left it on the kitchen counter without a word. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Each month, I dutifully wrote that check, and each month, a little piece of my heart hardened. It wasn't about the money. After selling my house, I had enough to live on comfortably for the rest of my life. It was what the money represented. I began to notice other things, too. How Thomas and Karen would lower their voices when discussing family finances if I entered the room. How they planned vacations without including me in the conversation. How the children were gently discouraged from spending too much time in Grandma's room. "Mom, could you watch the volume on your TV?" Thomas would say. "We can hear it upstairs." "Grandma, Mom says I need to finish my homework before I can play cards with you," Lily would tell me, her eyes downcast. I was living in their house, but I wasn't part of their home. One afternoon, while everyone was out, I was looking for a screwdriver to fix my reading lamp when I found something in Thomas's home office. It was the deed to the house, along with the original paperwork from when we had helped with the down payment. There, in black and white, was the amount your father and I had contributed, $120,000 in 2010, a fortune for us. Next to it was their mortgage statement. They had refinanced the house 3 years ago and taken out equity to remodel the kitchen and master bathroom, the beautiful kitchen where I now cooked meals for a family that charged me rent. I sat there in Thomas's office chair for a long time, looking at those papers, remembering your father's words. "Make this a happy home, son." This wasn't what he had meant. This wasn't what either of us had meant. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about my options. I could confront Thomas, but what would that accomplish? More tension in a house where I already felt like an unwelcome guest? I could find my own apartment, but at my age, starting over again seemed daunting. As I lay awake, I remembered something your father used to say. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that bring the most peace. The next morning, I called my old friend Margaret, who had become a real estate agent after her husband passed. I asked her a simple question. If I'm listed on the deed of a house as a co-owner, can I sell my portion? There was a pause on the line. "Helen, are we talking about Thomas's house?" "We're talking about the house I helped buy," I replied. It turned out that your father had been wiser than I knew. When we gave Thomas that down payment, Robert had insisted that our names be added to the deed as co-owners with right of survivorship. After he passed, that right came to me. I wasn't just a mother being charged rent. I was an owner being charged rent. 2 days later, Thomas and Karen announced they were taking the children to visit Karen's parents for a week during spring break. As they packed the car, Thomas reminded me about the rent being due while they were gone. "Don't worry, dear," I said, smiling. "Everything will be taken care of by the time you get back." After they drove away, I called Margaret. "I'm ready," I told her. What happened next still feels like a blur. Margaret found a buyer, a lovely young couple expecting their first child, much like Thomas and Karen had been. The house sold for much more than what Thomas had originally paid. As a co-owner, I was legally entitled to my share. I packed my belongings, the photo albums, your father's watch, and my grandmother's quilt. I left Thomas's keys on the counter along with a letter, explaining what I had done and why. I also left a check, my share from the sale minus the $12,800 in rent I had paid over 16 months. I rented a small apartment near Margaret, one with no stairs and a community of people my age. I hung your father's picture on the wall and put fresh flowers beneath it every Sunday, just like I used to do at home. When Thomas returned from his trip to find strangers living in his house, he called me immediately. I've never heard him so angry, so hurt, so betrayed. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. "How could you do this to us, Mom?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "Where are we supposed to live now?" "You'll figure it out," I said quietly. "You're resourceful, Thomas. You always have been." Is this because of the rent? We were just trying to be fair." "Fair," I repeated. "Was it fair to charge your mother rent to live in a house she helped buy? Was it fair to make me feel like a burden in what should have been my home, too?" The silence that followed was heavy with realization. It's been 6 months now. Thomas and Karen found a smaller house in a different neighborhood. We're speaking again, but things are different. There's a carefulness to our conversations, an awareness of wounds not fully healed. Lily and James visit me every other weekend. I've taught Lily how to make my special apple pie, and James and I have started building model airplanes together. Small connections, rebuilding slowly. Last Sunday, Thomas came alone. He sat across from me at my small kitchen table, looking older somehow. "I've been thinking about what Dad would say about all this," he said finally. I waited, giving him time to find his words. He'd be disappointed in me, wouldn't he? I reached across the table and took his hand. He'd want us to learn from this, to do better. Thomas nodded, his eyes shining with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how we got so lost." I don't tell this story to paint myself as a hero or my son as a villain. Life isn't that simple, and neither are families. What happened between us was the result of many small choices, many unspoken expectations, many moments where we could have chosen differently but didn't. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing. Could I have found another way? Perhaps. But at 72, I've learned that life is too short for regret. What matters now is what we build from here. Thomas and I are finding our way back to each other. It's not the same. It never could be. But there's honesty between us now that wasn't there before. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that change us for the better. Yesterday, Thomas called to ask if I would help him plant a garden at their new house. "Lily wants roses like the ones we had before," he said. "I thought maybe you could show us how to grow them." I smiled, remembering Karen and me on our knees in the dirt all those years ago. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." In the end, homes are more than walls and deeds and mortgages. They're the spaces where we learn who we truly are, where we make mistakes, and if we're lucky, where we find forgiveness. My home now isn't the house where I raised my children or the one where I thought I'd spend my final years. It's this small apartment with morning light streaming through the windows, with pictures of the people I love on every wall, with the knowledge that I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. And that, my dear, is worth more than any house could ever be.